Well, as we reported yesterday, negotiations between the government and the Greens, well, the Greens in particular, for the $10 billion Housing Future Fund have somewhat stalled out. It seems unlikely a deal will be done that would enable the Senate to create this investment fund before this week is out. Anthony Albanese is singling out the Greens' chief negotiator, Max Chandler-Mather, as the main obstacle here.
Now, the Greens Party ask about housing policy and ask about the cost of housing. I say to the Greens political party, pass our Housing Australia Future Fund, because you can't have credibility coming in here saying we don't think $10 billion is enough, we want $20 billion, therefore we'll oppose $10 billion. It's just absurd to vote for zero rather than to vote for progress. The Housing Australia Future Fund is on top of the Housing Accord. It's on top of the Commonwealth State Housing Agreement. It's on top of the homelessness plan that we have as well. It's in addition to Commonwealth rent assistance as well. All of those measures represent a comprehensive plan. But one of the things that we do not have control over, and the member knows quite well that we are not able to do, is, as a Commonwealth government, flick a switch and demand a rent freeze. He knows that that is not possible, he knows it's not real, and he should do better than come in here and make statements that he knows can't be delivered.
Well, let's bring in our political panel today, and joining us right here in the studio, Labor MP and member for Bennelong, Jerome Laxale. Welcome, Jerome. And Independent MP, member for Fowler, Dai Li is back as well. Welcome, Dai. Why don't we start with the National Anti-Corruption Commission? This one to you, Jerome. From a public interest point of view, this built up such a head of steam up to and through the election. Do you get a sense that interest in it peaked once the Parliament established the Commission? Do you think as much interest will attach to the Executive, the Commissioner and others who've been named today?
Oh, look, I think people are still very much interested in it, particularly those from New South Wales. I mean, the ICAC in New South Wales has served the state very well. And, you know, we recall that prior to this legislation being passed, the federal government was the only level of government that didn't have such a anti-corruption body. So legislation was passed last year to much fanfare, and now it's about getting the nuts and bolts right, getting it set up. And the announcement today is very welcome. Middle of the year is what we're expecting it for it to start. And you look at the merit-based assessment and selection process, you've got some really eminent people who will head this NAC. It'll be a very important job for them to do, and they'll do it.
I'm not sure if you've got any reflections, Dai Li, on the personnel who've been named here, but that same question that I put to Jerome, based on voter feedback, do you think interest did peak when the actual body was passed as a piece of legislation?
I mean, I supported the legislation, but in the community of Fowler, it obviously wasn't front and centre of people's mind. Cost of living is currently very much front and centre of people's mind. However, the announcement of the appointment of very eminent judges onto this board. Obviously, we'll see how it's going to pan out once the system's been set up, the structure's set up, then the process. I think the interest will peak again once we know who will be caught, through this whole NAC legislation.
Which rather raises the question, well, to you, Jerome, will we ever know?
I was just going to say, I think there'll be a lot of interest at that first public inquiry, whenever that is. So, look, it's got to set up, and I think voters realise that. It was top of mind of Bennelong voters, and we delivered on that promise. And, I like many other Australians, look forward to the federal government being held to the same account as our state counterpart.
All right, let's go to things that really do hit the hip pocket of people, particularly in your electorate, Dai Li. Housing Future Fund is kind of stalled out here, well, at least in the Senate, not so much in the House. There'll be no deal this week. Are there real-world consequences if this is not quickly resolved?
Look, I don't think there'll be real-world consequences because currently we have housing shortages anyway. I don't think that this bill will deliver the 30,000 houses that is supposed to deliver immediately. So there are no immediate measures to address the housing shortages. There are, in in my electorate, I think there's about 43% people who rent in my electorate of Fowler. I don't know what's yours like, Jerome, but we are going to face the increasing rent at the moment and increasing grocery prices and all of that. So that's going to impact people immediately. So I don't know how we would address that issue.
And who do you look to, particularly in the area of rent assistance or rent freezes? I see the Queensland government did something yesterday, in fact quite a few measures to address housing. Who do you look towards? So
the National Rental Assistance Scheme is going to come to an end. I did put it to the Minister that to extend that. I don't think that they're going to extend that, but I think for immediate measures to assist those on low incomes who are relying on, on social housing, to actually have that system in place. If the 30,000 houses will not be immediately built in the next 12.
Well, it's 5 years, which is actually a long process to get. It's
a long, and I don't believe it's going to be guaranteed to be built in the next 5 years either, with the shortages of land release and the planning and all of those approvals. As you know, it takes time to get anything built.
What's your sense on all of this, Jerome Laxalt? Do you think a deal will be cut and the Greens are just kind of negotiating here, or not negotiating, as the case may be? Is this deal doable, or do you have to go back to the drawing board?
Well, I think it's time for Adam Bandt to take over negotiations. I think the Prime Minister was right to single out the member for Griffiths, Max Chandler Mather. His style is very different to the Leader of the Greens, who we've seen this week has been very able to negotiate with the government on key legislation. The Housing Australia Fund was taken to the election, supported by the electorate, and will totally revolutionise how housing is delivered by the federal government, the biggest investment in over a decade. And as Di know, I mean, we both serve on local government. To deliver affordable housing, you need all three levels of government working together. What this fund does is it puts the federal government back at the table for the delivery of affordable housing. And yeah, it'd be great if we could deliver 30,000 homes this year.
Well,
we need to get the
federal government will not be delivering
right?
houses. I mean, they can provide the fund for obviously then state and obviously community housing, and of course working with developers to be enabled to make it happen.
But isn't the issue there around quantum? I mean, it's always going to come back to money in these things. It's not the $10 billion, it's the $500 million that it earns. Once you start spreading that around the countryside, it actually doesn't go as far as you might think at first blush.
Well, that's on top of $1.6 billion that's been delivered through other arrangements. It's on top of the Housing Accord, which is all the states and territories in the Commonwealth who have joined on, matching the government's further 10,000 home commitment. As I said, the federal government has dealt itself out of the delivery of affordable housing through funding or loans or unlocking super fund investment into the sector. And this bill signifies the federal government caring about housing again, getting involved, caring about renters. And I find it an incredible hill for the Greens to die on if they block this. Are they really going to side with Peter Dutton and vote this down? I don't believe they will, but I mean...
Why are you so certain that Adam Bandt is not already intimately involved in not the personal discussions with Julie Collins, but in whatever flows for the Greens, the decisions that have to be made?
Well, it certainly doesn't appear to be that way.
Rent freeze. We did just hear the Prime Minister in question time and replayed it here a moment ago, categorically saying this is not something that federal governments can look at. Should they, though, be providing a bit of moral leadership or encouragement for the states to examine those sorts of options? They're a little bit out of left field, but they could still be encouraged, couldn't they?
Our priority is to get that much needed investment into the housing sector through the fund. Super funds are unable to invest in affordable housing. The Housing Australia Super Fund will be able to bridge that risk gap and provide funding to super funds to get involved. So, but I agree with the concept that the federal government needs to be involved in housing delivery. This fund is the biggest step to getting the federal government involved again, and I encourage all senators to support it. Even the coalition senators, you know, they can differentiate themselves from their House colleagues, and you know, this is every affordable housing provider, all the community groups are desperate for this to go through. I can't see why we've stalled when we need housing.
The Senate moves in mysterious ways, as we know. I'm not quite sure the coalition will fold on that one. Just on rent freezes, though, that is one of the core demands of the Greens, apparently. Is that something a state government should be examining?
Look, I don't know how you can freeze rent, because if you think about it, the cost of living, everything has gone up, materials for housing and all of that, and everything, and so therefore you're asking landlords to kind of, the own properties to freeze the rent. It's just really, I think the core of the issue is the cost of living crisis that we're all facing, and there's so many issues that we need to address. And there's so many the supply chain, there's so many things that has to be retackled in order to address the cost of living crisis that we're all facing.
Encouraged at all by the inflation data that came out today, kind of suggesting the peak has passed, even though it's 6.8%. Yeah. Ouch.
The peak, but we still have not felt the impact yet of the 10%, the 10 rate rises. So that's still going to flow on. Yeah. So while it's peaked, so yeah. And
the ball's back in the Reserve Bank's court pretty soon on that one. Why don't we bring it back in-house in a moment? I think when we farewell you, we'll replay some statements that were given in the House, literally in the House at the opening this morning. Relates to an unseemly incident yesterday where the doors were ordered to be locked so a vote could be held, and there was some barging in causing injury. Is this a one-off or indicative again of this sort of cultural workplace behaviour issue that afflicts the Parliament? What do you think, Jerome?
So I was in the chamber when it happened, voting with the government, and I was just stunned to see not every member of the coalition, but all of a sudden, like a whole heap of coalition members just decided to run out, and I still don't know why they didn't stay in for the vote. I mean, that doesn't make sense. But in terms of the matter itself, it was pretty awful to see, and I think the Speaker has taken a very firm and just position here, and I'm sure you'll hear more on this because an apology is important, but we know as first-term MPs, some things really have shocked me since coming here, and that was certainly one of them. I'd never expect to see that.
Did you witness it because you were closer to that set of doors? And full contrition, by the way, we will show those who apologised, about 7 in total. We'll show that in a moment, but your take on the incident?
So I know that the door is actually quite narrow. So and it's very confusing when divisions takes place, and I don't know if people are in there, and when it happens, and it's a new MP, you don't know when it stops, and it's just very confusing.
1 minute bells, 4 minute bells,
and all that stuff. So we actually, and I had a meeting and I left. I just walked out already, and then I just turned around and I heard some kerfuffle to look to see what was going on. I actually did not see what happened, but obviously later on discovered that there was all this apology, and of course, we need to have safe workplace for especially with staff in Parliament, and I think that's something that we need to really be considerate about.
Was there any margin for error here? Specifically, I ask, in your new MP's school, was it instructed to new MPs, including both of you, that when the Speaker says the doors are to be locked, there is no further egress or ingress through them?
I mean, I can't. I mean, look, that was about nearly 12 months ago, Craig. And
not
I think,
a detail you necessarily remember.
And I think, being the first-time MP and very overwhelmed with the fact that you got elected, in my case as well, and still very much sometimes asking myself, oh my God, I'm here. And so I think I can't recall. You learn. This is something you learn along the process.
And they tell you to read the standing orders. But I mean, you look at those who gave the apology today. I think all but one is, only one's a first-term MP. The rest know the rules. They should have known better, and they should have stayed in the room.
Yeah. Well, let's see if this kicks on or whether it was in fact a one-off. Jerome Laxale, Di Lee, great to have both of you back, and we'll talk